to have Professor Tobias Bach joining us today. So, we have a very long, it's been quite a while that we somehow worked together. We worked on my PhD for some part of it at Oslo, University of Oslo, and he has been very kind and a very nice mentor since then. I'm very happy that you joined us today, and he'll be talking about politicization of merit-based bureaucracies. He has done quite some work on this thing. So I'm really looking forward to the findings and what he has to tell us today about it. So the floor is yours too.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Abiha, and I hope everyone can hear me. I'm just trying to, yeah, perfect. So yes, so the topic I chose for today is, as Abiha mentioned, politicization of merit-based bureaucracies, and that may of course sound like a contradiction in terms, because you would think, well, a merit-based bureaucracy, in such a bureaucracy, there would be no room really for politicization. But as I will try to show you today during my talk, and I will refer mainly to some of my own work in which I have in recent years studied, in particular, the central government bureaucracy in Norway, where I'm based. I have done earlier also work on Germany, where I'm originally from, and more comparative work. But today the main focus will be on Norway and a few neighboring countries, in particular Denmark, from which I draw some insights on. And I will there will be two main things that I will focus on. One is our different insights related to essentially recruitment appointment to leadership positions in the bureaucracy, and that is where I would argue there is, at least in the contexts that I'm studying here, there is a fair degree of merit, and merit is certainly the dominant mode of recruitment. There are some elements of politics in it, and I will mention them, of course, but the main picture is certainly one of merit-based recruitment. But on the other hand, in the second part and more towards the end, and I will try to say a bit more also about what's going on inside the bureaucracy, and say something about decision making. And my take on this is that we have this paradox where you have strong merit-based recruitment and promotion and such like, but on the other hand you have a very high degree of what I and others have called functional politicization among senior level bureaucrats and in ministries and the like. We're thinking politically, thinking in terms of what is good for your minister politically. That this is an important part of what civil servants do. So there is this paradox in a way, and I will say a bit more about that later on. But first of all, I'd like just to give you some briefly locate the context that I'm talking about internationally, and then I'm fully aware that this is extremely difficult to read. That at least the figure that I have here, but I will just give you the main picture. This is based data taken from the so-called Quality of Government Expert Survey. This is an expert survey that is done in regular intervals by colleagues at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, just some 300 kilometers south of where I'm sitting now. And they are asking experts around the world about different dimensions of, in particular, what they call quality of government, which is about impartiality, broadly speaking, but not only impartiality in the terms of decision-making of bureaucracies, but also in terms of hiring in particular. So they asked these experts, and they have several experts per country, To what extent are appointments to bureaucratic positions in central government based on political or personal connections? And here, I'm not sure you can see my, oh, it should be here is my pointer. So Norway is sort of at the bottom here, clearly at the bottom, which means sort of lowest level of patronage. This is their definition of patronage. Whereas at the top, you would find Venezuela, Angola, and actually Poland. I wasn't able to find Pakistan in this one here, so I looked it through, and there's a long list. I don't know why. Maybe they have been struggling finding country experts. I have no idea.
They have Pakistan. Sorry to interrupt. They have Pakistan in the recent wave, in the
okay.
The third wave.
That's
they have added Pakistan gladly.
Okay, good. For some reason, it's not here. I don't know why, but good. That's good to hear. So this is sort of when it comes to patronage, Norway, how they define it, sort of the involvement, like political connections playing some role. And then there's the other side, which is of course closely connected, which they call merit. To what extent are appointments based on individuals' merits, knowledge, skills, job-related expertise or experience? Sorry, and there again, Norway is sort of at the top of this. So this is of course experts' assessment, which always have to be taken with a grain of salt. But in the broader comparative perspective, I would say, you know, I think it's safe to say that Norway is among the most meritocratic countries in the world, and alongside some Scandinavian neighbors, but also some other European neighbors, but also actually Asian neighbors like Singapore, Japan, South Korea. So this is where we are. So just to give you a bit of a context on a global scale. And now I wanted to present a bit of my work, which has actually tried to exploit a bit sort of differences even between highly meritocratic countries. So what I did with some colleagues was actually to run a comparison of Norway and Denmark, another Scandinavian country. And Denmark is here at, I don't know, maybe 10th or so in this one here. If you ask bureaucrats themselves on the patronage question, so the one I showed you before, to what extent political involvement or plays a role, then actually Denmark comes lower than Norway. There's other data on that, survey-based data, but the big picture is they're pretty close. But still there is variation, and we try to sort of exploit that variation, and I will show you how. So what I want to look at now is sort of this idea of looking at political change and how political change relates to changes in the bureaucracy. And here's the sort of basic idea behind this research. If you have a purely meritocratic system where sort of politics is detached from administration, then you would expect that top bureaucrats stay in their jobs when there's a change in government or even a change in minister. For example, in Norway and in Denmark, which are parliamentary systems of government, there you have this strong idea of ministerial autonomy. That is something you also have, for example, in Germany. It's less strong, for example, in the UK, where sort of the prime minister has more powers. But in the context that I'm talking about, ministers are sort of, they have the authority in their areas of responsibility, and unless there is a cabinet decision which says something else, they can sort of run the show in their ministries, which it includes appointments. In contrast, in a more like stylized, politicized bureaucracy, you would assume that the careers of political advisors and other politically appointed positions, so even if that is sort of, it could even be like a more informal sort of politicization where you think, okay, political criteria play some role for the hiring and firing of top civil servants, for example. And that would be visible there, that if you have a new minister coming in or a new government coming in from a sort of different part of the political spectrum, then this would sort of be visible in some change among top level bureaucrats. So they would see some turnover. So to make this even more simple in a way and to make it like possible to research this, we argue that if you see a temporal connections or a connection in time between the replacement of bureaucrats and political changes, that is sort of an indicator of the politicization of the civil service. There can be different dynamics in there, and that is a general challenge for this type of research. Sort of people may be fired, if you wish, or sort of moved around, or people may just say, okay, look, I really don't want to work for this new government or new minister because I don't share their political priorities. But actually, this plays into the same direction. So if there's a civil service where which is sort of ready to serve governments of either side of the political spectrum, then that should not really be a problem. So what we did is essentially we collected data on top civil servants in Norway and Denmark, working with a colleague in Denmark, and then we actually studied how long did they stay in their office and in office and at what time did they sort of leave. And then we said, okay, look, there are some periods in which there is a sort of, we would expect an increased risk, as we call it, technically, of them leaving, which is sort of after a government change or after a minister change. And then we see, okay, is there a sort of correlation between this? And sort of here you see sort of the title page of that paper published sort of earlier today. Now, this was sort of the broad story. So in politicized systems, you would expect changes in the bureaucracy following a government or minister change. In meritocratic bureaucracy, would not really expect that. But actually, we actually see some differences in between Denmark and Norway. And we try to say, okay, look, can we sort of exploit this a bit? And here I will just show you briefly, and you can, of course, read this in the paper. It's a table from the paper. And our argument is that you have sort of variation in merit-based system, and what we came up with sort of these sort of type of ideal types, where you have a more what we call pure merit civil service system, where actually there is the departmental leadership below the minister is essentially really small, and primarily this is the Danish case on the left hand side, where you have below the minister a permanent secretary with a civil servant status, and you have one or two ministerial advisors, but they don't have executive authority. That is the political leadership of a ministry, or not actually the political leadership, but that's the leadership of the ministry. And there are very few formal politicians, if you like. The minister and maybe two ministerial advisors. And then you have this sort of, on the right-hand side, the hybrid merit civil service, where you actually have in between the minister and the permanent secretary, you have what is called a state secretary, that can have different names. It's some sort of junior minister, if you like, which is so that the political leadership is sort of larger, and this is something which you see, for example, in Norway or Sweden or Germany. So we try to sort of theorize this difference So within a variation within merit-based civil service systems, and we had this first hypothesis, which is the sort of setting up a new team hypothesis, where we would say, okay, in this pure merit civil service system, where there is actually basically only the minister and his or her two political advisors, that there the minister is an incoming minister is just very is dependent on these senior civil servants, and therefore have to set up have an incentive to set up a new team. So the argument would be sort of a bit of a sort of distrust type of argument, okay, there is this permanent civil servant. That person has been working with let's say, the government before, or the minister before, and should I really trust that person? So using that argument, one would expect a higher turnover risk. So more changes in these pure merit civil service systems. Now there's a competing hypothesis which basically says the opposite. So and we just theorized in both directions, and where the idea is, well, in these pure merit systems, there is actually a higher dependency there is this dependency, it's still there, of the incoming politicians on these incumbent senior civil servants, and actually that makes them indispensable. Sort of if you would sort of force out the permanent secretary, then you would really be in trouble, sort of understanding actually how governing works, and you would not be able to get your political agenda through. And this result sort of translated into sort of the methodological expectation would be, okay, there's a lower risk of turnover, so less exchange in systems with a pure merit civil service compared to the hybrid one. So which is in our case Denmark, the pure merit, and Norway the hybrid one. So how does this look like? So this is a typical table which you can see in this sort of survival or event history analysis, where you essentially see, okay, look, here is on the x-axis you see time. So this is years in office, and you see that and sort of at the beginning, at time 0, you see on the y-axis you see the 1 on the top. So everyone is in office at time 0, and then they sort of gradually drop out of office. And what we see here is that sort of, if you look at the broader picture, Denmark and Norway are just very, very similar. And I think we ran some statistical tests, and there is no sort of statistically significant difference really going on here. And some of these permanent secretaries have been sitting there really for a long time, although this has gotten shorter, but our data starts in 1970, I think. So that is kind of they used to sit really for a long time earlier. But now let's look at how this looks for Norway, and here we sort of split up this figure by episodes where there is a government turnover, which is sort of the light gray line, and when there is no government turnover, which is the black line. And what we see here is that essentially that the line here with the government turnover drops more quickly than the line with the no government turnover, which essentially means that yes, government turnover matters in the Norwegian context. I mean, I'm happy to answer more questions on the details of this. If you haven't seen this before, then it may be a bit confusing. But essentially, in Denmark, we don't see this effect. So we clearly see that this is something happening only in Norway, but not in Denmark. So if you turn this into some sort of regression, there actually where you differentiate between Denmark and Norway, and there what we find is essentially what you can see here on the top, is that government turnover increases the risk of turnover of civil servants in Norway, but not in Denmark. Minister turnover actually decreases the risk of turnover in Norway, and all of this has no effect in Denmark whatsoever. So in that sense, the findings essentially reinforce our indispensability hypothesis, saying that, well, yes, in these sort of pure merit systems where you essentially don't have a big political leadership, it is important for ministers to keep these top civil servants to be able to manage governing basically, and more, taking this a bit further, what we also see is that basically politicization, in the sense that you have these state secretaries, these junior ministers, which you can sort of which is one form of politicization that actually matters for the careers of top civil servants. But as I said, again, there are some challenges related to sort of, are these really forced out? What is going on here? But our main argument here is sort of, if politics did not play any role for the careers of top civil servants, then you would not see this sort of this pattern here. So I think I'll just move on, and then I can take some questions later on. I want to show you a bit more insights from my research, which goes a bit deeper into sort of who these top civil servants are, because the analysis I just showed you is really based on sort of who for how long is person X in a permanent secretary positions in Ministry Y, and that does not require any other sort of more detailed data on that person, which is kind of nice in a way. What I did in a different paper with a colleague here from my department is that is published in Norwegian, but there's at least the title, and there's an abstract which is translated between meritocracy and politicization, a study of professional expertise of agency heads with and without a party political background over a sort of 40 years period. And our starting point there is we have sort of anecdotal evidence that there are some agency heads, so agencies are sort of reporting to ministries. They are more specialized, more expertise type of bodies, more sort of hands-on rather than policy-making functions, although they do have like rule-making functions. And we ask ourselves, okay, we have some anecdotal evidence. You sometimes see that agency heads, which is a civil servant position, that there are some former politicians, so people with clear political affiliations having those positions. And then we ask ourselves, okay, has this changed over time? And then we try to sort of figure out, okay, is there sort of some trade-off, between sort of those political qualifications, you can call it a qualification if you like, or those political backgrounds, and sort of their professional competence. And in particular, we were interested in sort of, do governing parties, when there are sort of appointing sort of people from their own affiliated to their own party, do they sort of are they more willing to make these trade-offs? And that is something that I wanted to elaborate on this later on, but I should mention it already. So this is kind of one important feature of them, at least how things work here in Norway, is that it's actually perfectly possible that a government appoints a head of one of these regulatory or executive agencies who is affiliated to an opposition party, sort of a former minister, for example, or a former member of parliament from what then is an opposition party that is actually happening. It's around 50-50, slightly more appointments in our sample, which are made by governing parties appointing their own people, if you like, but also a sizable share of people who are affiliated to a different party. So how? I mean, there's quite a few details here. I'll try to keep it brief. But what we did here is we were not able to sort of study all agency heads in Norway. That would have been too much. And the specific challenge here is really that this sort of expertise measurement, which you see here on the right hand side. So what you want to get at is sort of in how far are these people? Do they have a background which means both education but also sort of work experience, which is sort of directly related to the mission of the organization they are leading. I'm also, and Abiha knows that I'm also have a project here where we do this for selection of organizations, and where we are doing comparative work, where we try to develop this further. But the main challenge here is really, okay, this just requires a lot of hard work and sort of diligent coding of basically CV type of information to really establish, okay, where does that person have the relevant expertise? So we have these 48 different agencies under 4 ministries. So that was our sort of how we sampled. Basically, we looked at this expertise. We looked at expertise related to the mission of the organization. We looked at leadership experience. Sort of, do they have leadership experience from different types of contexts? And we sort of created different indices. So one is based on expertise, sort of education, job experience. One is leadership, and then we have a combined index of competence. And if you look at this, and this is sort of this is just a descriptive chart, so where we basically see that, okay, those who are, it's a number of appointments of the people in our sample per year. So it is up to 8 appointments per year in 2012, I think this is. And those who are dark, that's the one who don't have any obvious political affiliation or political experience, and those who are white or light here, they are the ones with the political affiliation. So what we see here is basically the big picture is the majority do not have this political affiliation, and actually there's a declining trend over time. Now we know that it's not disappearing. We know that there are appointments also more recently of people with political background, but they were not in our sample. So it's in our sample we see this declining trend. And when we look at political experience, we really try to get at the things that you would see sort of in a CV, basically, sort of positions in government, parliament, or political parties. So full, like working there or being sort of elected. And government affiliation, that is of course then, okay, is this political experience connected to the current government or to an earlier government? So to look at moving on to the findings. So what we try to do here is basically to see, okay, how do those people who have this political experience, do they score? How do they score related to those without the political experience? So those without, that's the sort of dotted line here. And what you clearly see here is that when it comes to the sort of expertise, that those with a political background, they score lower than those without the political expertise. When it comes to leadership experience, there's not really much of a difference. But when you throw this together, these two indices of expertise and leadership experience, then it's, again, you are those with political appointments are below the average of those without political experience. And this is, well, as you can see, driven by this sort of specialized experience. Now, this is just a big picture. So as I said, In Norway, governments sometimes appoint people even if they are from an opposition party, affiliated to an opposition party. So we asked ourselves, okay, is there sort of are government parties sort of more willing to trade off on competence? And actually, yes, they are. So what we see here is that this is, let me just see, sometimes it's a bit, yeah. So yeah, again, you have the dotted line. Sorry, this is sort of the ones with those without political experience at all. And here you have those with this round dot, those who have who are affiliated to the government when appointed, and those the other ones with this triangle, they are not affiliated to the government when appointed. And what we see here then basically is that yes, those with the government appointment, they score lower, significantly lower on this competence index and on the overall on the sort of expertise index and the overall competence index relative to those without political experience or the more career civil servant people. But this doesn't, you don't see much of a difference for those who have this opposition affiliation. So there is this government effect. So how do we make sense out of this? Well, there is limited evidence of politicization overall. You don't see many agency heads with those political backgrounds. You see a decline. And governments appoint from both their own parties and from oppositions. But you have this sort of a trade-off that the governments, when they appoint, these people are less, sort of on average, slightly less qualified. But they go through a regular sort of appointment procedure. So there is this sort of procedural check, if you like. So now I'm seeing that I should maybe speed up a bit, but I would just wanted to just show you, before I move to this sort of more functional politicization, what's going on inside the bureaucracy. I wanted to briefly show you the result of a survey experiment that I have been conducting with my colleague Pierre Skevin, who is presenting this at a conference in Denmark today. And what we did is that we ran an experiment, so a survey with an experimental component to employees in Norwegian ministries and agencies, because we wanted to learn about what do the employees think about different types of leaders leading their organization, and we sort of tried to developed a theoretical argument, and this is sort of work in progress, so I'll make it really brief. And that's sort of who these top leaders are matters for these for the motivation of the civil servants in these government organizations. And this was done through the panel of public administrators. So that is a sort of survey that runs normally twice a year to public administrators, to civil servants, and I've been involved in building this up. I'm happy to answer more questions on this. So what we did is essentially on the right-hand side, this is sort of in Norwegian, so this is really what the respondents saw. They were basically given this information. Okay, look, imagine there is a vacant position in the senior management of your organization, and now there's these two candidates that are being discussed. And then they were shown sort of profiles of these candidates, and then were asked to respond questions about under which would you prefer to work, and this was sort of done twice, and all of this is sort of fully randomized, which allows you to sort of measure the effect of these different attributes of these characteristics of the leader. And I want to show you sort of the main figure from this research. So we looked at, for example, personal connections, which is sort of one indicator of sort of patronage appointments, and what demotivates civil servants clearly, sort of if the person is recruited for is one of the minister's close friends, but other like having studied with a top political appointee is not considered really problematic. Just want to highlight maybe two more findings: substantive expertise versus generalists. So civil servants clearly prefer working under specialists who have expertise in their own organization, and that is actually a clear finding that is also that I also found in other work that is about to be published in JPART, where we did a slightly different experiment, but where sort of this expertise dimension was really important. And then when it comes to political parties, so here the party activism, so being affiliated to a party sitting in government is sort of the baseline here, and then when you move here to the right, this would be sort of in a party outside of government or never politically active. So there is a preference for people to work under people who are not affiliated to the current party. So in a sense, in a nutshell, this says, okay, the type of profile that you would get when you hire someone from your own party, who is often also less qualified in terms of expertise, that's something that also the civil servants will not really like a lot. Good. So now I've talked a lot about sort of recruitment and turnover and what civil servants think about the recruitment of different types of people to leadership positions. But now I want to look a little bit into sort of what's going on inside the administration. That is primarily based on work by other people, but I'm sort of working now on, especially with this panel of public administrators I'm working on, or I have collected some data, but it's just still needs to be analyzed. So to me, really, this sort of paradox of the merit-based bureaucracy is that there are low levels of patronage. Appointments, political connections play a very little role in sort of hiring and promotion and removal decisions, but there's a high degree of functional politicization. So there is, one could think that, wow, you have this bureaucracy, politics doesn't play a role or a minor role in the appointments. So, you have these bureaucrats and they just, they're sort of sticking to their professional identity and not really listening to the politicians. And that's something you could, that's an impression you could get when looking at this from the outside. But actually, in order to function, these bureaucracies really need to sort of listen to their ministers and really need to gain the trust of the ministers when ministers and prime ministers come in office. So there are these very strong norms of loyalty towards political principles in combination with norms of party political neutrality. So there's this idea that, okay, you need to be able to serve each minister equally well. And I've talked to sort of top civil servants in the, for example, the prime minister's office, saying that, I need to follow and I need to know sort of the party programs, the party platforms of the others, because any day I could have a new boss, and in theory at least, and I need to be ready to serve that new boss. But of course, political loyalty is of course not the only thing, so they have to pay attention to, for example, legality, truthfulness, which are important norms of sort of bureaucratic integrity. None of this means that since we saw that political leadership is not really big, it's not big in Norway either, compared to other contexts. So it is actually, the civil servants must be able to provide quite a bit of political tactical advice, and that is what this sort of functional politicization is about. That they have to be able to think politically. And I brought you a quote here from two colleagues, Turid Husted and Heidi Salomonsen, that I'm working together with a lot, and they did research on these meritocratic bureaucracies, and they said they write thinking politically is not a no-go for civil servants. It's a necessary precondition for doing a good job. But it does not refer to politics, it refers to navigating through political landscapes. And this is sort of where the line is drawn, party politics and governmental policy making. And that is sort of something that has been, that is what is being discussed a lot. I had this example from a research from colleagues, but I just jump over it. It's not so important. So, so this is, and this is the problem in a way. This is where the challenges are. That in a sense that you have these strong norms of loyalty towards the government in place, and this merit-based system would not function without this sort of strong loyalty, or you could call it political responsiveness, as you like. But this is such a very strong norm that it may actually trump other important norms like legality, like truthfulness, or party political neutrality in dilemma situations. And here you have on this article, I just translated the title. It says, someone must guard the border or the line. This is a former top civil servant. She has served for many, many years. And she says, you know, look, someone must guard this border because the politicians are sort of overstepping it. They are trying to make, at least there's some examples of it, trying to make the civil service do party political stuff.
Sorry, Nadeem, please turn off your mic.
Oh, sorry. Apologies.
It's okay. All right. So this is sort of the message here, and why is that so important, this message? Because many of these norms about sort of balancing political responsiveness and, for example, legality, truthfulness, that is sort of, these are informal norms. They can't really be legally enforced, and that is why guarding this border is so important, and that's a job that probably the civil servants have to do. And in addition, sort of this decision-making that is going on, if you're sitting in a meeting with your minister or preparing a dossier for the minister, and then, you know, if sort of you're asked to do something which is sort of not okay, it's still happening inside the bureaucracy and will go unnoticed. So I'm almost at the end. So what is needed here, and here is I show you this picture of the title page of these are sort of government internal guidelines. So this is not a law or anything. It's sort of some guidelines for civil servants. And I would say, yes, civil servants are important to sort of safeguard this border. But politicians must also know that, you know, the civil servants are not just there for serving them, but they are also there to protect sort of the integrity of the civil service. For example, paying attention to legality, truth, expertise, transparency, good governance. And there is sort of, but there is sort of always this fine line, sort of at what point are you really sort of, as a civil servant, when is your duty to sort of say, okay, look, this is not okay, this is sort of against the constitutional order, for example, or when you have just maybe unconventional politicians coming with new ideas. I mean, there's a fine line between sort of protecting the constitution, protecting integrity, protecting liberal democracy, or just, not letting democratically elected politicians do their job. So it's a difficult thing. Just before I finish, I have this sort of this slide here, which is I just wanted to highlight one work that I'm doing and it is this network, COREX, Comparative Research on the Executive Triangle. It has a primarily European focus, but it also has branches a bit throughout the world. So this is essentially a net of over 120 researchers who are studying the executive triangle. So ministers, top civil servants, political advisors, who they are, how they interact, what are norms of integrity, how does accountability work, and so please watch out for more things coming from this network. Yes, I'll stop here. And I'm happy to take questions, of course. And I need to find, where is it?
Okay, thank you so much for this very interesting talk. I always, like always, have lots of questions that I keep posing to Tobias always, but I'll let others ask questions. I'm very glad that we have colleagues from Bangladesh and Nepal as well who have joined us. And then we have some very senior people from Pakistan. Dr. Nadeemul Haq has also joined us. So I'm very happy. I'll open the floor for questions. So yes, please. You can pose your questions. Tobias, if you don't mind, can you please stop the screen sharing so people can see?
Oh, is it still on?
Yeah, it's still on somehow.
Oh, sorry. It's my better now?
Yes. Okay. So yes, Rabil has a question. Yes, please, Rabil.
Yes, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So first of all, thank you so much for that wonderful, wonderful presentation. It was really informative. I have two main questions. So first of all, I'd like to know, what is the fine line between political sensitivity as competence, and then when does it turn into patronage? Because, I personally think that given the modern political landscape of the world, particularly in countries like Pakistan, political sensitivity is like a competence now. It's merit, right? You need to have a relationship between, the administrators and the ministers to make the whole government work. So what is that fine line when political sensitivity or responsiveness turns into negative kind of a patronage? And second question was more about the competence index you were talking about. I was really interested in knowing what the dynamics of this thing is. So if you could explain that in a little bit more detail.
Okay, perfect. Very, very good questions. Thank you so much. So of course this this fine line is of course that's a tricky one, and at least in the context that I know best, which are sort of the Scandinavian countries, Germany, Netherlands, this fine line would be primarily related to party politics. So there is sort of this clear expectation that when it has two aspects. One is sort of civil servants should support the work of, let's say, their minister when that person is doing work of a minister, but when that person is sort of, I don't know, doing more party political work, then they should sort of not do it. They should refrain from it. But of course, that's not always easy to distinguish. So if you have like a minister who's presenting sort of, okay, look, I'm let's say the Minister of Health is asked to speak at some party convention, and he lays out sort of the most recent health policy reform in the country, then, well, the job of the minister is to work with health policy reform. But of course, the minister is also a party political figure who is asked to present this. And in this hypothetical example, I think civil servants would normally say, yes, sure, I can present you I can prepare you some slides, some talking points. But the sort of your party political twist to it, that is something you need to add yourself. Another aspect of party politics is really related to sort of elections. So when elections are nearing, then civil servants, they get into this sort of very kind of careful mode and sort of certainly try not to get too much involved into or not at all involved in sort of party anything that sort of smells like party politics in election processes. But outside of this, I mean, these bureaucrats are really working a lot towards sort of making their minister shine, and they may develop sort of also good relationships. So of course, I mean, sometimes the relationships are not so good, but it's not. I would say, for me, this is really about functional politicization, sort of patronage. To me, at least, is always related to this idea of sort of when it comes to appointment, promotions, removal, these sorts of things. Less about the sort of day-to-day interactions. Now, the competence index, that's a good question. So as I said, it's actually quite simple in a way, that in the sense that we were saying, okay, look, we have these 3 indicators. I think it was on education, on relevant work experience in the career, and immediate work experience before taking up the post. And so the difficulties in developing this index were really related to, okay, for each of the organizations, like 48 organizations that we looked at, what is really the sort of the most, or what are sort of relevant educations, for example, for this type of task that they are performing. And this is and this required quite a lot of sort of back and forth between us as project leaders and our research assistants to look into this. So I mean, you asked about the dynamics of this competence index. So I'm not sure. I would have to go back to my data really to see whether there's a change over time. I don't think we have looked into that more specifically. That was not our main interest, at least. So I would have to go back to that.
Okay, do we have other questions? There's a comment from a colleague from Nepal, Trelochin. You want to say it?
Yes, thank you. Actually, it's. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, fortunately I got connected to this important webinar. Thanks, Avia, for sharing invitation. So I learned a lot from your presentation, how the politics and bureaucracy, they try to manage the balance or equilibrium in terms of relationship. But one thing I'm wondering, so when you're talking about meritocracy, we often used to look from the input side, like the competency or the education level or something like that.
Yeah.
But what about if you look from the result side, from the delivery side? So maybe it doesn't matter how well educated a person is, but is unable to deliver. How do you claim or say that person has a merit or something like that? Is there any practice of looking meritocracy from result side in your knowledge, in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. There is some, of course, I mean, to some extent, of course, when I'm for example, what I just explained about sort of this measurement of expertise, I mean, this is sort of very it has to be sort of very a rough measurement, right? I can look into sort of what people studied, what subject, and what kind of jobs they had, and if they got a position of an agency head, I would assume that they did a good job in their work. But in that sense, the sort of merit as in terms of results, at least when people are hired or promoted, or for example, we have some in some positions in government, we have like administrative positions, senior positions, we have sort of these type of leadership contracts where sort of bonuses, for example, are attached to sort of performance. So this is sort of evaluated how well people are doing their work is sort of being evaluated as a sort of part of a recruitment process, for example. I mean, it's of course to me it's more difficult to say that, and that is of course a crucial thing to say that do people with certain backgrounds perform better. So it does sort of merit on the input side result in sort of better performance on the output side. There is, I would say, really good evidence for this on a sort of more global scale with colleagues like Carl Dahlström and Victor Lapuente using this quality of government data that I presented earlier, where they show that sort of on a global scale, merit-based recruitment has all sorts of positive effects. There's a recent literature review published, I think, in Public Management Review by some colleagues, and they also did this sort of review, and they also show that merit-based recruitment sort of is good for good governance, broadly speaking. And what I think some of my own research, at least, where I look into sort of perceptions of civil servants, but also citizens. There is also sort of the data I showed you on sort of this experiment. I think it shows quite clearly that civil servants working sort of under leaders with specific qualifications, that they value some types of backgrounds more than others, and that's sort of it's a rough indicator of sort of performance on the output side, but I think it tells us something about. Because if you assume that motivation of employees is important for the overall performance of the organization, then you would say yes, it makes sense to pay attention to whom you hire if you want to sort of motivate your employees. Thank you for the question.
Great.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you so much for addressing a wonderful information. And the previous colleague asked a very right question, that the merit-based actually is defining on the basis of the inside actually capabilities. Well, for me actually, if I compare it with the private sector, actually it doesn't. They don't just count it from the inside. They also count it from the outside, which you agreed actually. And outside actually that the deliverables. So the capability could be measured according to the delivered, whatever they delivered in the past. So don't you think that if we connect it, that I found that thing is missing in your research. Actually, capacity is there. You mentioned capacity, but actually there is output actually is missing. So if we connect it with the output actually, then we could elaborate further that okay, these guys are purely there on the merit because of their delivery even as well, inside and the outside. That's the first thing. And the second thing actually is when you talked about the motivation, actually motivating the bureaucrats, actually that would help to get the organizational performance. But the question actually is if they are coming through the help of the politicians or the ministers actually. So what would be the motivation for them and the people who are going actually from those posts actually? So how would they be motivated in their new role? So that, don't you think that could be a critical thing? And it seems very difficult just to motivate people in that context. What would be your reaction on these two things, please?
Yeah, okay. So I try to so if I understand you correctly, so the first question is really about sort of what difference does it make for the output of an organization, for organization performance, when it comes to the type of person you really have at the top. So and how far do sort of the things I showed, which are more on the sort of input side, on the capacity side, how does that translate into output, into performance? And that is a very fair question, and that's one of the more tricky ones in this area of research, because the biggest challenge, I think, is really to find comparable sort of output measures for different types of organizations. So there are some colleagues in the US who've done that, who looked into sort of when the US government like many years ago, well, not many years ago, like 15, 20 years ago, created some sort of performance score, which was used for all sorts of government organizations. And then these colleagues could sort of compare how does sort of the background of the leaders in those organizations affect performance, because it was a comparable measure. But here I really have the challenge of, and others who are doing this type of research have the challenge of sort of finding good comparable metrics of government performance. And it is especially difficult when it comes to sort of ministries who are sort of mainly policy producing organizations. They, finding that's a sort of broader topic, obviously. How do you measure the performance of public organizations? That's a sort of huge topic, and it has been sort of you can do it, I think, but especially it's much easier when you go to the level of some sort of more delivery type of organizations, whereas the ones that I'm mainly studying, at least now, are not delivery type of organizations. So there's one colleague in Sweden, Erasmus Broms, and he's doing this related to sort of, I think it was nursing homes or sort of that type of organizations, and trying to sort of finding organizations which are really comparable and where you can sort of isolate the effect of the background. And then I don't think he had much of it didn't matter that much actually in his case. But I would also say that, and I will briefly get back to your second question. But I would also say that, there's this, for governments, in the sort of input, the capacity, whom you hire, that is an important thing in and of itself. It is crucial for governments that they sort of make sure that the hiring process is fair and that the best possible candidates are being hired. Now, when it comes to this motivational question, of course, that's an interesting one, and I need to think more about it. Sort of, I would say, in a sort of more politicized system, the motivation of someone who is sort of, appointed more in a more patronage type of fashion, the motivation of that person would be related to sort of, okay, my job is to sort of work for the political agenda of my minister, of my government, and that is really what I'm for. Now we have 4 or 5 years. Let's do it. That is the motivation. And the second point is that and I mentioned some examples here in Norway, that you would have people who are, for example, are hired for these agency head positions. Either they're coming from the opposition or the governing parties, and then you could think of, okay, what about their motivation? Are they motivated sort of, if they're coming from an opposition party, to work for the current government? But there, I think there's the sort of the context here, at least, it's very consensual. So it's not a very polarized society, and it's sort of and there's a question of also the pool of potential people who can do these types of jobs, really. So I would also echo a bit the very first comment, this idea that political sensitivity has become a qualification sort of in and of itself. It is actually quite, and you can see it also sometimes in the sort of job ads for this. So these are all publicly announced positions. That they want people who have a good understanding of the political landscape. That is something you need to have to run also a more specialized executive or regulatory agents. I hope I could at least answer some of the things you were wondering about. Thank you.
Okay, do we have more questions? Okay, Tobias, there was another question, but I think somehow he left the meeting.
Yes.
So one question that I have is, I was wondering on the first paper that you shared, where you operationalized hybrid systems and politicized systems, purely meritocratic systems and then hybrid systems, sorry.
Yeah.
So, and this is a little tricky when it comes to the secretary level, because that's the most senior position. But then how do you exactly see the difference? Because I see that almost the same variables were on the both sides. Because there you're also looking at people who are from civil service, and on the hybrid side, you also have those ones. But then, I mean, I might want to have a little bit clarity on how do you differentiate between the hybrid system and the highly merit.
So the argument is really that, I mean, that these systems are very similar. So you spotted it very right that this looked very similar. Totally, that's perfectly correct. But and there is of course a historical heritage to it. So for 400 years, from like 1300 something until the early 1800s, Norway was part of the Kingdom of Denmark. So there is a sort of common heritage here. So these systems are very similar, but the big difference is that sort of the political leadership in Norway is just bigger. And there is, in addition to the minister, this sort of second position, the state secretary or junior minister, you could call him or her, who is sort of, so there is just more, and that's sort of a person on top of the decision-making hierarchy. So it's you have a sort of additional, basically you could also say that in Norway, technically speaking, the permanent secretary is sort of, if you count from the ministry, is one level below. There's sort of one link in between the permanent secretary and the minister, if you like. That is sort of the main difference. So we're basically saying this is this one difference. There is a sort of higher degree of formal politicization, if you want, of more persons who are political figures in the Norwegian government relative to the Danish government. I mean, in international comparison, well, that's not a big difference. It is sort of it is a small difference in a sort of small part of the world. but we see it matters.
I was actually trying to place Pakistan on either sides, because I don't know, because somehow I was struggling. Pakistan is not supposed to be a very meritocratic system, but it was falling on that side more. So the secretaries are mostly civil servants who are from the civil service, and usually given that position, we have advisors, political advisors, ministerial advisors, who are working maybe as a secretary, but not exactly. The secretary position usually goes to that to the civil servants.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if it really depends on who exactly has the power, because advisors are mainly advising and not exercising the secretarial powers.
Yeah. Well, that is the same. That is the same in both Norway and Denmark. Although the advisors they're not coming from the civil service, so they are sort of can come from anywhere. They're often like party people, really.
They could be.
Yeah.
Okay, well, while I have lots of other questions, I might ask if there is someone has other question, because I can always ask you questions later on. So do you have any other question, Curie? Okay, I think we don't have any. So Tobias, that would be really nice if we can have the papers that you shared. We can try to that would be really great. And
I can share them with you, and then you feel free to distribute. Okay.
Yes, surely. And congratulations for the paper that's out today.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you so much for your time and for joining us.
You're welcome.
Wonderful insights. And thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you. Bye.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.